Well, thank you very much to the organizers and my colleague Ru Song for giving a good overview of some of the national level policies in China. I'm going to focus a little bit more on the livestock sector in China and some of the developments, but also demands from consumers. My name is Isabel Nepstad, and I'm based in China, working for Solidaridad China. So I'll just give an overview of consumer trends, but also what's happening in the industry and sort of what are some of the new developments. So of course, as we know, China is a huge country. It tends to be the elephant in the room with quite a large population, but we've also seen significant economic growth, GDP growth, but that also leads to other issues, urbanization, globalization, and then also increasing demand for meat products and animal protein. So that is also leading to growing concerns for sustainability. Of course, food security is a big concern for China, but also livelihoods, poverty alleviation, but also climate change and biodiversity and natural resources. So just looking at the population, because we're seeing an aging population in China, and also there's very different consumer trends and habits of the consumers. So now the bulk of the population is sort of the younger to middle age group. We can see here 48.5% is between the ages of 25 and 54. And their consumption habits are very different from the older population, where they tend to save more. They're a little bit more, eating, more traditional Chinese food, but now younger generations are adapting Western eating habits, eating more meat, and also, eating Western food. So this is an important trend, and just seeing how China is demanding more meat products, and especially beef in this case. So just some of these trends you can see here. The younger population contributes the most significantly now to consumption in China. Also a growing trend is just the accessibility to the internet through mobile devices. And now there's a lot of big internet companies. You probably know Alibaba, but also Baidu, Tencent. And these big companies are really leading the way and also entering the food industry. So now you can, buy things online. There's a big use of e-commerce, but also making payments online as well. So you can see a significant portion of the Chinese population now have access to the internet through mobile devices. But also more food is being purchased online, and that's through the online platforms and through e-commerce. And lastly, more and more Chinese consumers are also caring more about quality and safety. That's definitely a priority. And they're also now willing to pay more for higher quality foods, and also food that is considered ethically produced. So we're seeing that that's a growing trend in China. So here are just some images of what you see in China every day. So you can literally go out and leave your house just with your phone. You can purchase everything. You see these barcodes. You just simply scan and pay for. It can be the fruits and vegetables on the side of the street. It can be if you want food delivered. So food delivery and purchasing through your phone is really the growing trend in China, and these are all linked to also the big e-commerce sites like Alibaba. So here you can see Alipay, which is also a product of Alibaba, and that you can pay through Alibaba, and also the food delivery services. Also, now everyone is getting food delivered. It's all about convenience and making everything very accessible. And you can see all of the delivery guys, running around on their bikes in, all the major cities in China. Now, linking this to the beef industry, of course, China is also a big producer of beef, and they represent 10% of the market share. So there is, of course, interest in China to also help their domestic industry, but realizing, of course, that they do have their own challenges and they do still have to import significant amounts of beef. So yeah, one thing is that water and land and are serious challenges in China. So because of these, China does have to import significant volumes of agriculture products like beef. But also price is a big issue too. We can see that domestic beef has a much higher price than imported beef. So for that, China also, we see consumers tend to prefer imported beef rather than domestic beef if they have that choice. Here is just one farm in Inner Mongolia. And here you can just see this graph shows domestic beef production and consumption volume. So you can see from the blue line, domestic production, and then the orange line, which is consumption volume, that domestic production volume isn't able to keep up with the consumption volume. And so for that, there's a gap, and they do have to import beef, as many of you already know. So there is a gap, and that's what why beef imports are so important too. And then this is just seeing that the domestic beef production is increasing steadily. You can see that it already reached 7.35 million metric tons in 2018. Of course, there are many production efficiency challenges in the domestic industry. It's highly fragmented and varies across China, with many mainly backyard farms that lack expertise and experience. But then also, as I mentioned, they're also constrained by land, water, and supply chain issues, and also feed. There's less support for beef production. China is a major pork consumer, and beef tends to not be seen as sort of the main meat that's consumed. So there's a lot more government support for the pork and poultry sector. But also, there are issues of food safety that also has impacted the meat industry over the years. Now, getting into beef imports, we can see here that it's also been increasing quite significantly, and in 2018 we saw a record high of 1.06 million tons. So we are also seeing that that's significantly growing due to consumer demand. And it's hard to say, sort of look at the statistics, because about half of China's imports do come from gray channels and sort of smuggling in either through Vietnam or Hong Kong. This is sort of a collection of different statistics and comparisons, but this is sort of the approximate amount. And looking at the countries, so early on, back in 2015, Australia was still the biggest country exporting to China, but that changed, and now you can see Brazil and South America, Uruguay and Argentina are now significant players. And in 2018, Brazil accounted for 30% of China's beef imports, which is quite significant. And just looking at the channels of how beef is consumed, we can break it up into three parts. The food services, so mainly restaurants, hot pot, steakhouses, barbecue, and then also institutional buyers, so canteens for some of the companies and government offices, and then also the retail markets, as I mentioned, online shopping, but also supermarkets and wet markets as well. These are just a very few select of some of the major players. I mentioned some of the e-commerce companies, but also the importers and also domestic producers. And some of the domestic producers are also importers. And yeah, Chinese food is very different. It's also very unique. So here we have a picture of hot pot, and you can see the beef is very thinly sliced, but also more the ground beef. It's not the big steaks that we see in South America or churrasco. Also very common dishes is the beef noodle soup. So you also see the sort of cubed meat, and also the barbecue, the skewers with beef on a stick. This is some examples of some of the online shopping. This is Jingdong, And you can see here, the first one is beef from Australia, also very thinly sliced for sort of hot pot type dishes. And then we also have two others from Brazil and Uruguay, where it's also sort of the cubed beef. And this you can all buy right, online in Jingdong in an app on your phone. It's very convenient. But also now these apps are also providing more information on where the beef is coming from. Consumers want to know not just what country it's coming from or what province in China, but also the origin and knowing the farm. They're now really through these online platforms looking at experience and seeing more and learning more about the food. So here we can see some ground beef from Australia, and it also shares an introduction of the origin, but also sort of some tips for how to eat this beef. Now this is an example of pork that was produced in China. In this case it's from Kofgo meat. And here you can, when you purchase this bit of pork, you can see what farm it came from, when it was produced, and it's tracing all the way back to the farm and the province, and also saying when it was slaughtered, what was the temperature. So this is what consumers are now starting to demand. They want more traceability and transparency in when they buy meat. And also this is the same meat product, but it also gives an introduction of the farm where the pork came from. And also it gives certificates for safety and quality. So that's also part of what consumers are also looking for when they're buying meat. And just a quick wrap up, I'm running out of time, but some of the government policies, of course, we also are facing African swine fever in China, so there are going to be increasing imports of meat products, but also support for the domestic industry. And then also increasing use of technology and AI in the meat sector to address the transparency and traceability issues for food safety and quality. But also there's also new policies on sustainable agriculture. So this includes CO2 emissions, more standardization of the industry, but also concerns of biodiversity protection, and also just strengthening the green supply chain systems in China for food. So these are some of the growing trends, and we're really seeing China moving towards more greening of the supply chains. And last, we're going to also have a short video by one of our partners from the China Animal Agriculture Association. We're also looking at starting a similar roundtable initiative in China. So just a few words from him. He would have also liked to be here, but just a little bit of his perspectives.